In celebration of an incredible 100,000 subscribers, this week I'm going right back to the beginning with a special episode that I've been wanting to make since I started this series. This is a kind of prologue, or episode 0 for the basics as a whole, about some names and concepts that I regularly mention on the show, 2 Japanese toy lines, and the story of how they came together to become something more. This is the real-world history behind the invention of the Transformers. The origins of the Transformers can be traced all the way back to the very first action figure, G.I. Joe. Designed by inventor Stan Weston and released in 1964 by the Hassenfeld Brothers Toy Company, this highly posable 12-inch tall figure was a huge success, and soon, America's movable fighting man was being licensed by other toy companies around the world to sell in their markets. In 1966, British company Palitoy released the toy line under the new name Action Man. Then, in 1971, Japanese company Takara released it as Combat Joe. However, Joe's military theme wasn't a big hit in Japan, and in 1972, Takara took the basic design of the toy and reworked it to create Henshin Cyborg. Rather than an ordinary soldier, this figure was a robotic superhero with a see-through body and chromed mechanical innards. The word henshin is Japanese for transform, referring to the character's ability to alter his body. His limbs could detach and be replaced with weapons, and costume packs for the figure were available that could transform the cyborg into famous Japanese heroes like Kamen Rider, Ultraman, and many more. Takara wanted to produce vehicles and playsets for Henshin Cyborg, but the large size of the toys, coupled with the high cost of oil at the time thanks to the 1970s energy crisis, meant that it would be too expensive to do so. Consequently, they decided to shrink the toys, creating a new series of 3 3/4 inch tall figures, for whom an expanded range of vehicles, mecha, and bases could be affordably produced. Launched in 1974, this new series, Microman, was marketed on the premise that the toys were actual size, 1-to-1 scale figures of tiny cybernetic aliens from the world of Micro-Earth, who had come to our Earth after the destruction of their planet, and now defended it against mutated members of their race known as Acroyers. With interchangeable accessories, modular construction that allowed many of the toys to disassemble into component pieces and be rebuilt into new forms, and new themes and play features introduced each year, Microman enjoyed great success, with a tie-in manga by Yoshihiro Morito even being published in TV Magazine. Some particularly significant figures included 1975's Robot Man, the first ever robot toy that could turn into a vehicle, and 1977's Cosmo Countach, the first robot to turn into a sports car, though neither was the first true transforming robot, as they converted only by being taken apart and rebuilt. That honour belonged to 1975's Brave Raiden, released by rival toy company Popey. Microman would feature an increasing number of these transforming robots as it continued, and Takara, seeking to focus more on toys of this kind, hit upon the idea of a spin-off line specially dedicated to the concept, which would downsize and downplay the pilot figures so that the robots could take the spotlight. The result was Diaclone, a line of 1 to 60 scale robots designed by Shoji Kawamori and Kazutaka Miyatake that converted into fantastical sci-fi vehicles and fortresses, piloted by tiny 1-inch tall figures with magnetic feet. Its name a portmanteau of Diamond and Cyclone, the Diaclone line launched in 1980 and told the tale of the Diaclone Corps, using their mecha to protect a near-future Earth against the insectoid forces of the alien Waruder Empire, who had come to the planet to steal the super-energy Freezon discovered at its core. In 1982, Diaclone took the concept of transforming robot toys to the next level with the introduction of the Car Robots subline, designed by Kojin Ono. These were the first true transforming robot toys to convert into real-life cars and trucks without having to be disassembled, used by the Diaclone Corps to disguise themselves while hunting for Waruders. Beginning with the Super Tuning Countach, based on Microman's Cosmo Countach, the car robots were a hit, and in the years that followed, the entire Diaclone line shifted focus to be all about robots that turned into vehicles and animals from real life, including jets, trains, construction vehicles, dinosaurs, insects, and more. A theme Takara called Real and Robo. Now, while Diaclone was enjoying success, Takara also rebooted Microman in 1981 as New Microman, with an increased emphasis on robotic figures. In 1983, the series decided to get in on Diaclone's hot new idea of transforming real-life objects, but blended with Microman's actual size theme. A team of designers including Takashi Matsuda and Hideaki Yoke got to work, and the result was the Microchange series, populated with transforming cassette players, tapes, watches, guns, toy cars, and more, explained to have been created by the Microman scientist Salam to combat the Acroyer's evil new admiral, Acro Devil. Slowly but surely, the transforming robot craze began to spread around the world. By the middle of the decade, Diaclone and Microchange toys were being sold in continental Europe by Italian company Jig and French company Justra, and in Finland by Takara themselves. Between 1983 and 1984, Takara even released a small handful of the toys in the United States, in the form of two toy lines that they called Diacron and Chronoform. But Takara found that they didn't have the means or the budget to compete in the crowded American marketplace. To do that, they would need a partner. Now, to understand how Diaclone and Microchange transformed into the Transformers, we need to pause here and wind the clock back a bit to look at what was happening in America while these Japanese toy lines were going on. In 1976, American toy company Mego licensed the Microman toy line for release in North America. Rebranded with the new name Micronauts, Mego's version of the line didn't really have a story behind it, selling itself on the interchangeability of the toys, but it was still a big earner for the company, and even spawned a tie-in comic book from Marvel Comics in 1979. The comic fleshed out the world of the Micronauts where the toy line hadn't, establishing them as inhabitants of Marvel's subatomic microverse, and it was so popular that it outlived the toy line by 6 years, and even enjoyed a crossover with the X-Men, the hottest comic book of the era. Micronauts was responsible for introducing the 3 3/4 inch figure size to the American market, and in 1978, Kenner's Star Wars toy line was produced to the same scale, with the incredible success of that line then turning 3 3/4 inches into the industry standard for action figures. This in turn inspired Hassenfeld Brothers, or rather Hasbro as the company was now known, to reboot G.I. Joe in this new popular style for the 1980s. But a lot had changed about how toys were sold to kids since the original Joe's heyday. Up until 1981, advertising on children's television had been heavily regulated, but that year the Reagan administration lifted those restrictions, meaning that it was now permissible for companies to produce entire cartoons dedicated to promoting their product to kids. It was with this in mind that Hasbro, through their advertising agency Griffin Bacall, partnered with Marvel Comics to develop their new G.I. Joe series, subtitled A Real American Hero, for release in 1982. Where toy lines of the past, like Micronauts, had no detailed story or characters, this one would be different. Marvel helped devise a premise for the line that reimagined G.I. Joe not as a single soldier, but as an elite combat unit, dedicated to defending the world against the ruthless terrorist organization Cobra. Drawing inspiration from an unproduced comic book pitch that he had been working on, titled Fury Force, writer Larry Hama devised names and detailed character profiles for the individual figures that would be printed on their packaging, and the toys were then sold via a 3-pronged marketing strategy. a comic book published by Marvel, also written by Hama, animated television commercials, and a full-length animated miniseries, both co-produced by Marvel's media subsidiary Marvel Productions and Griffin Bacall's animation production company Sunbow Entertainment. It was the beginning of a beautiful friendship. In June 1983, a Hasbro representative attended the Tokyo Toy Show, where Takara were displaying their Diaclone and Microchange toys. This representative brought news of these toys to Hasbro pitchman Henry Ornstein, who convinced Hasbro CEO Stephen Hassenfield and R&D Vice President George Dunsey to license the figures for their market, giving Takara the partner they needed. While trying to figure out how best to rebrand the figures for America, it was Griffin Bacall who proposed that Hasbro combine both the Diaclone and Microchange toys into one single toy line, which Jay Bacall, son of company chairman Joe Bacall, named the Transformers. The company also came up with the idea of making the robots the main characters. Instead of the non-living mecha that they had been in Japan, they would be sentient alien machines, split into two warring factions, the heroic Autobots and the evil Decepticons. With these basic ideas in place, seeking to replicate the winning formula of G.I. Joe, the company once again approached Marvel Comics to help further develop the world and characters of the Transformers. Marvel editor-in-chief Jim Shooter tasked writer Denny O'Neil with producing a story treatment for the line, but O'Neil's work didn't impress Shooter, so he just decided to write it himself. Shooter's treatment told the story of how the alien robots had come from the planet Cybertron and crash-landed on Earth 4 million years ago. Awakened in the present day by a volcanic eruption, they took on the forms of Earth's machines and resumed their war, the Autobots now aided by the human Witwicky family, as they struggled to prevent the Decepticons from taking control of the planet's many sources of energy. A few of O'Neil's concepts made it through, like the name of the Autobot leader, Optimus Prime, but there was still much work to be done developing the rest of the cast, and after being turned down by several potential candidates, Shooter gave the job to editor Bob Budiansky. Over Thanksgiving weekend, Budiansky crafted profiles that gave all the remaining toys names, personalities, powers, and weaknesses. And soon, work began on both a 4-issue comic book miniseries edited by Budiansky and a 3-part animated miniseries from Marvel Productions and Sunbow. Though evidence has recently emerged to suggest that Marvel Productions attempted to pitch their own idea for the cartoon that ignored what Marvel Comics had created, a more comedic proposal entitled Car and Cable, featuring a transforming Volkswagen named Muffler, or Muffy for short, plus multiple kid sidekicks and a dog. Unsurprisingly, Hasbro didn't go for it. The Transformers toy line arrived on shelves in spring 1984, consisting of 28 toys drawn from both of Takara's lines. Some of them now sported new colour schemes, and of course the pilot figures were long gone, though the cockpits built into the toys did remain. Rather than the toys though, the first commercial was dedicated to advertising the comic book, which arrived on May 29th, with the cartoon following later in the year on September 17th. Both were huge hits that turned into ongoing series as the Transformers became a juggernaut of mid-1980s children's entertainment. In 1985, Hasbro imported most of the remaining usable Diaclone and Microchange toys to make up the second year of the toy line, along with an assortment of other robots licensed from various other Asian toy companies. While Takara, impressed with the success of the line in America, made the decision to cancel Diaclone and Microman and bring the Transformers to Japan in their place. From 1986 onwards, the two companies began working together to design and produce brand new toys for the Transformers line, with Hideaki Yoke relocating to Hasbro's Rhode Island headquarters for a year to serve as liaison between the two companies. Bob Budiansky continued to invent names and profiles for the hundreds of new toys that would be introduced over the rest of the decade, and also took over the job of writing the comic with issue number 5, remaining on the title until 1989. While Yoke and Kojin Ono would work on the toy line at Takara until well into the 21st century. And the rest, as they say, is history. But the saga of Diaclone and Microman doesn't quite end there. In the decades to come, Takara would periodically revisit the two series. Microman was revived in 1999, redesigned for the new millennium, with new toys centered around magnetic and light-up electronic gimmicks, which, in a reversal of history, even included a few recolored Transformers figures. Though supported by an anime series, this revival would only last 2 years. But then, in 2003, the line was resurrected again, this time targeted at older collectors, and ran until 2007, offering a mix of original characters and a variety of licensed properties, including even a figure of Transformers Energon's human protagonist, Kicker Jones. Diaclone, meanwhile, was also relaunched as a collector-targeted line in 2016, updating and reimagining the sci-fi mechs of the original series, which is still ongoing as of 2020. Diaclone and Microchange also continue to influence Transformers toys today. Since the beginning of the 21st century, color schemes from both series, which weren't used in the original Transformers line, have been periodically revived on new and reissued Transformers toys to create new Transformer characters, beginning in 2002 with Road Rage and Crosscut, and continuing through to today with bots like Cordon and Spinout, who was an actual Diaclone mecha that was transported from its home universe into the world of the Transformers, and brought to life as a true super robot lifeform. Notably, in 2015, the official Transformers convention BotCon offered an exclusive set of such toys, along with a comic that told the story of Burnout and Lift Ticket, a pair of Diaclone mecha who travelled across the multiverse to help stop a Waruder invasion of Cybertron. Even Micronauts, which has been owned by Hasbro since 2009, after Mego went out of business in 1982, has crossed over with the Transformers in comic books from IDW Publishing, and a new animated series is currently in the works. So that's the story of how the birth of the action figure itself spawned two Japanese toy lines that in turn became the robots in disguise we all know and love. Historical proof that Transformers is, and always has been, more than meets the eye. And those are the basics on Diaclone, Microchange, and the creation of the Transformers. Thanks for 100,000 subs and 3 years, guys. Hit like if you've enjoyed, support the show on Patreon if you're able, and as always, stay tuned for more history and lore from the world of the Transformers.